The breakthrough podcasts in 2025 won't be shows that are following the crowd. It will be shows creating specific experiences listeners can't find anywhere else. And after analyzing shows across hundreds of niches, I've mapped out the exact process of transforming a standard generic podcast show into a unique podcast that stands out from the competition and gains traction fast. And in this video, I'm going to break down the 3-step differentiating system that you can use to break past slow and steady growth and finally start gaining more momentum and more traction from your podcast without needing high-profile guests or a massive production budget. With that being said, let's start off by actually understanding what the typical journey is for most podcasters. So look, this is what the typical journey looks like for most podcasters, and it's honestly why so many people struggle to grow. Month number 1 and 2, when you first launch a show, there's massive excitement. You're buzzing, you're like, holy shit, my numbers are growing, things are moving in the right direction, and you're getting great feedback because, again, you've just launched this new show and everyone on social media seems to be excited about it. Month 4 and 6, well, growth tends to start to slow down, engagement starts to plateau, and you feel like you're losing momentum. And then month 7 plus, a lot of people get to a point where they kind of flatline, and for some reason they can't seem to figure out why their show can't break past a specific number. For some people, that's 100 monthly downloads, others is 1,000, others is 10,000 monthly downloads, others is 100,000 monthly downloads. The point being, eventually growth does become stagnant and flatlines. And look, this happens because so many podcasters are out there copying Joe Rogan, Stephen Bartlett, all the bigger shows. They kind of look at them and just, again, create carbon copies. They see it's working for them and they just assume if they create and go down the same path, then growth is guaranteed for themselves. But this doesn't happen. It rarely does. Because you end up playing a losing game as a business owner or an expert who's a 1-man or 2-man team at this alone, where you don't have an unlimited budget. But not only that, again, you're competing against these big people trying to create similar shows to them, where you could go down a much simpler path and differentiate yourself so you can be compared to another show. This is how you stand out in 2025 and not get drowned out. So look, here's what most podcasts and experts won't tell you. They won't tell you the fact that the plateau isn't happening because your audio or because your next promotional strategy. And one that I hate the most is the fact that so many agencies out there are saying, we're going to create promotional clips to help you get exposure. But what good is exposure on a very good podcast that still isn't increasing in terms of listenership and actual audience size? It's great you got 1,000 views on your short form clip, but what about the meaningful relationship you're trying to build with your audience on your podcast? So your show isn't growing for these reasons. It's happening because so many podcasts fall into the sea of sameness. Now, what this looks like is if you look in the business space or the personal development space or any podcast category for that matter, what you're seeing is this, right? The same interview format, the same types of questions being answered, the same episode lengths, the same publishing schedule once a week. Everything just feels the exact same. Again, as a carbon copy of particular types of shows, as a format that's been repeated and done several times over. Now, think about this from a listener's perspective, right? When every single show in a category follows the exact same format, why would they choose your show over someone who's established in the game, right? Let's say you started doing like more entrepreneurial, personal development podcast style, trying to copy what Stephen Bartlett's doing. But Stephen Bartlett has a massive production team. He has the best guests on earth, and he produces the highest quality type of show within that space. Why would someone pick your show over Stephen Bartlett's when they look from the outside the exact same? Now, yours could be better. The interviews might be better. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying from a listener's perspective, from the outside looking in, why would they pick your show versus someone like Stephen Bartlett? Another example, if you're like in the anxiety space or the sleep space or, whatever space you might be in, again, there's always an authority figure. And if your show is very similar to theirs from the outside looking in, why would someone pick you over the established authority? Now, is that fair? Fuck no, it's not fair. Should you get the views? Hell yeah, you should. But again, we have to be realistic in terms of how listeners tend to behave. So this kind of carbon copy creates what we call a podcast pyramid, right? Where at the top, you have the leaders like Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, Stephen Bartlett, Sam Williamson, Tom Bellew, all of these massive figures. And in the middle, we have established players with decent following, maybe 100,000 followers. They're kind of grown organically, massively. And then at the bottom, you have thousands of similar podcasts. And I think this is where most podcasts end up, where you have the top of the pyramid and you have the bottom of the pyramid where everyone's just fighting for attention and no one can seem to break through because, again, they just look like carbon copies of the already established authority within their space. That's really where we don't want to be. That's where you definitely don't want to be if you want to stand out and gain traction fast. Because look, in a saturated market, you need to be 5 times more interesting to what people are currently listening to. Slightly isn't better. Like if someone just finds your podcast and is slightly better than, Stephen Bartlett's or Tom Bellu's, if it's not like a massive punch to the face of holy shit, how the hell have I missed this content? This is incredible on all fronts, the interview skills, the audio quality, the production. If all of that stuff just feels slightly better, again, just because that person's got a bigger name, the established authority, they're going to get way more pull compared to your show. Now, again, is that fair? No. But is that just how listeners tend to behave? Is that how we behave? Is that how you behave? I would say so, yes. So let's start playing by those rules. And that's why we say that the first impression really does matter. It needs to be a jaw-dropping experience. And if you can't create that for whatever reason, maybe you don't have the budget to have like super epic audio quality sound. Maybe you're not getting the highest caliber of guests because your show still isn't as big as it needs to be. For whatever reason, maybe it's time to, again, play by different sets of rules and not just try to be a carbon copy of another show because, again, you will get compared to these other podcasts. Now, look, we've worked with hundreds of podcasters and we found that the shows that break past their plateau, they have a differentiating factor that sets them apart in comparison to all the other shows that they're competing against. A perfect example of this is one of our clients, Laura. Laura, for example, was in the leadership space, targeting introvert executives. Now, rather than having a generic show about, leadership tips or interviewing other leaders, we created with her 10-minute case study style episodes analyzing A-list celebrities who've built influence and translated those lessons to her audience, showing them how they can become better communicators, better leaders, again, by dissecting A-list celebrities. This gave her a very unique angle in comparison to other shows, whereas, again, just tips on leadership or other shows were just interviewing a bunch of leaders. This made her show distinct. It made her show stand out. And as a result, she grew. She went from 4,000 monthly downloads to over nearly 20,000 monthly downloads. She's actually now at 30,000 monthly downloads. This screenshot was taken early in January, 6 months ago. She's now at 30,000 monthly downloads because, again, she made her show stand out from everything else out there. She became one of a kind. Listeners couldn't get her type of content anywhere else, and the only choice they had was to keep coming back for more. So now you understand why a USP, unique selling point, why it's so essential. Let's break down exactly how you can create one for yourself, right? So like I mentioned, there's really 3 steps. And step number 1, and it starts with this: identify your niche's pattern and break it. So use this process. Search in on Apple and Spotify, leadership podcast, marketing podcast, nutrition podcast. Clearly, you'd only search in the keywords or the search terms that are highly relevant to your space. So whatever industry you're in, whatever category you come under, that is the category you want to be exploring. And you want to look for the top 10 shows out there in the market. You might already have some ideas of other competing shows in your space. You want to start analyzing those shows. Start getting an understanding of, what formats do they use? How long are their episodes? Are they more focused on solo podcasts or are they more focused on interviews and having guests onto their podcast? Do they have panels where it's actually a group conversation? You should want to start spotting the trends that typically occurs for the shows within your space. And then ask yourself the simple question of, okay, all of these podcasts are here. They're all creating pretty good content. They're clearly at the top and have a massive audience for a reason. But what's actually missing? Like, rather than me just creating another show that looks the exact same, what's actually missing? How can I provide an additional layer of value in comparison to these other shows? Once again, what's missing? That's the gap that you want to fill. So this might be you asking the questions of, could I create? Now, what you might stumble across when you've spotted these gaps is you might start realizing, hey, look, could I do shorter, punchier solo content, meaning solo podcast episode, where it's just me and I just share my thoughts? Because everyone else seems to be having a guest-focused show that's super long and drawn out. Maybe there's a space for solo podcast episodes that are way more punchy. Could I add more storytelling hooks and case study elements to, again, create more of a narrative arc when it comes to my podcast? Because everyone else is way too heavy on information. And of course, if everyone else is heavy on storytelling, maybe yours should be more action-driven and action-packed and information-heavy. And then finally, could you use a different structure entirely? Could you get voice actors? Could you create certain sound effects during your episodes? Like, again, just getting creative in order to create an experience for your listeners. Once again, what is the gap? What's missing from your space? And how can you fill it? So making this a bit more practical, right? If everyone in your niche does hour-long weekly interviews, maybe a solo 10-minute daily show format immediately sets you apart. Daily show, really? Yeah, it's a lot of work. I'm not suggesting you do that, by the way. I guess I'm trying to illustrate how if you were to do that in a space where everyone else is long, information heavy, long hour-long interviews, and you come in with 10-minute solo daily episodes that are, again, value-packed, you will stand out. You will gain more traction because you're filling a gap in the market. Step number 2. Launch and actually start experimenting and test out this new podcast in the real world. There's no point just sitting there and thinking how great this could be and that could be. The truth is, after helping so many podcasters and going through our own journey of growing and monetizing our show, you don't know what the market wants. You don't know what people are going to super hook onto. And maybe you have something really special and people would love, but maybe you have to get good at the execution. And that takes time, right? So you have to test it out in the new world. You might have this theory that you think would be good, but you won't know until you do that episode for a prolonged period of time. So it's important to know that you shouldn't wait till things are perfect. Just try your new format for the first 4 to 8 weeks. And I say 4 to 8 weeks because you need to get used to the workflow. You have to have an understanding because it could be a good idea, but your own execution, I've had this before where it's taken us 4 weeks or maybe 8 weeks to get good at a new type of podcast format. And again, it's because it's new, it's fresh, it's not going to happen overnight. So give yourself the time, 4 to 8 weeks to really give this a good go. And of course, ask yourself during that process, is this actually fun? Am I having a good time? Is it resonating? Do I feel like this is something that the market actually needs? Do I feel like I'm providing a gap within my space? And then of course, track your numbers, right? The end goal is to make these changes to drive more growth for your show, to reach way more listeners, to not feel like you're just screaming into an empty void, creating valuable content for years for no one to listen. So again, we have to look at the numbers. And the 2 main metrics you want to focus in on is number 1, your retention time. Now, retention time simply tells you how much of your content have your listeners consumed. If you have an hour-long show and your average retention time is 50%, it means that people on average consume 30 minutes of your content. Now, why this is so important is because it tells you whether or not people actually enjoyed the episode. If people are consuming 80% or more of that episode, it means it's good. And hey, by the way, review your current episodes before you made the change. Have a look at your retention time. Are people enjoying the current format you're doing? Or is your retention time below 80%, which by the way is a problem. It means the majority of people aren't consuming your content. It means you're not able to fully build the like, know, and trust. And it means that if you want to eventually sell your stuff or grow your email list using your podcast as that mechanism, you'll struggle because most people aren't enjoying the content. That's why it's such an important metric to track when you try this new format. Look at your retention time. It'll tell you if people are actually enjoying the show and consuming the content. And then 3, look at your download per episode over a 7-day window. We want to know that the episode is gaining popularity. We want to understand that it's actually working and people are enjoying it, that the idea is sticking around. So look at both of these metrics, your retention time and of course your actual download number within the first 7 days, and compare that to other episodes of yours. And then step number 3, if the new format is fun to make, easy to produce consistently, because again, you might have this outlandish idea that sounds fantastic, but you're busy, you've got a bunch of stuff going on and you can't keep it up, that's not sustainable. So it needs to again be something that's easy to produce consistently. And then finally, if it's actually getting a higher retention time and growth, just double down and just scale that system. It's proven to work. It's something that's different. It's going to help you stand out from the market and it's going to pick up traction. It's already showing signs of life. You just double down. You create a system around how to create these types of episodes. You create templates. You batch record your content so you're not scrambling on this content hamster wheel, and you just progress and promote that new episode aggressively to your email list on social media. You make sure you optimize it for podcast SEO so you're being found on Apple and Spotify. You go all in on the new format. That's really what I'm trying to say. And of course, if it's not working, which more times than not, that is a possibility. You might try this out and it doesn't work. But hey, that's okay. At least you've actually done this experiment, and you've now got more data around what your audience like and what your audience don't like. So if it doesn't work, just adjust. Maybe you've got to tweak the hook. Maybe you have to try a new angle. Maybe you have to reduce the frequency or simplify the flow. But this is just, again, a process of testing, trying something new, seeing if people like it, and going for it if they do, and then eliminating it if they don't. The other option is you don't do anything and you stay stuck in this crowd of sameness, stuck with a show that isn't growing, that isn't monetizing, that you know is super valuable, but you're struggling to reach the right people, or because you kind of have a very similar show to everyone else. But at least this way, you're trying something new. You're kind of breaking past the old habits, the old paradigm that wasn't working for you in the first place, and you're exploring something new and a different path for growth, rather than just staying stuck and static with no hopes in sight that things will actually get better. So think about this. If you want to grow a podcast that turns strangers into pre-sold dream clients, that grows and gains massive traction, you can't just have a good podcast. You need a podcast people cannot ignore. Different gets remembered, different gets shared, different gets clients. Think about all the benefits you'll gain from having a show that stands out. When you're promoting on social media, what would that do for you? When the new listener discovers your podcast and feels like, holy crap, I can't get this anywhere else, how will that affect your show's growth? When you give a CCA at the end of the episode and it feels captivating and compelling, what does that mean for your newsletter, or what does that mean for your community or your program or your course or your one-on-one clientele? What happens when your show truly stands out and people start experiencing it? And look, that's exactly what I'd love for you to experience. Step number 1, analyze your niche's podcast space. Step number 2, break the expected format. Step 3, create a unique angle and USP for your show. Step 4, test the new structure and track the results. Step 5, double down on what's working and eliminate what's not. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.